You're watching our NDTV special focus on the big announcements by the Prime Minister yesterday at the important UN panel on climate change at Glasgow. And joining me is Sumant Sinha. He's a chairman and CEO of renewable, which is one of the biggest renewable energy players in the country. And thank you, Sumant, for joining us. I believe you are in Glasgow. Is that? Am I right?
I am here right now.
You're joining us from Glasgow, and so you're very much part of that that whole group that's there. So thanks very much for joining us, Sumant. So I just wanted to ask you, obviously there's been a lot of commentary, a lot of praise for the Prime Minister setting some very ambitious targets. But the questions being asked is this realistic? When the Prime Minister said one of the targets will be that we'll do 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuels in 10 years. That's clean energy, basically. Currently, our total capacity, which is fossil, non-fossil, everything, is just 400 gigawatts. So basically, it's almost like saying in 10 years, we'll only have clean energy, we'll be wiping out coal and other sources of dirty fuel. Is that realistic?
Yeah, so Srinivasan, we have to go into the actual numbers a little bit carefully, because keep in mind that the Indian market is growing as well. The Indian power market is growing at 5 to 6% every year.
Sure.
And that requires its own, new capacities to be added. So we actually need to add, we need to actually double our generating system over the next 10 to 12 years just to take care of the incremental demand growth. So that is point number one.
Okay, so what you're saying in simple terms, Sumant, sorry to jump in for a second. So the ordinary way to understand, we are saying that it's not as if coal will be phased out, it's just that you'll be generating so much extra power. So coal will still have a role, but you'll still have, on top of that, 500 gigawatts of clean energy.
That's right.
But coal won't go away.
That's right, because we just need that much more capacity in our system to meet the growing demands of the country. And also keep in mind one more thing, that from a capex standpoint, 3 megawatts of renewables is equal to 1 megawatt of coal-based plants, because it just generates lower plant load factors. And so therefore, we need to install more renewables to actually meet the demand growth by a factor of almost 2 to 3 times.
Okay, but I put it to you that while it's absolutely creditable to aim for those goals, but look at how dependent we continue to are on coal. So when it comes to actual capacity, coal versus non-coal is somewhere like a 55-40% split. 55% odd is still coal, 40% is non-fossil, which is wind, solar, and so on. But in terms of generation, Sumant, as you know, 72% of power is still being generated by coal and 24% is the rest. Now, given this ratio, do we seriously think in 10 years we can flip it around so dramatically?
Well, yeah. Look, I think it's very simple. The maths is very simple, Srinivasan. If we consume 100 units of power today, out of which let's say 65 is or 70 is coal,
right,
and 30 is everything else,
right,
we need to add another 100 units more of requirement. Out of the 200 units, we are seeing coal will increase from 70 to 100, but everything else will increase from 30 to 100 as well, which is why the Prime Minister said that in 2030, of the total power demand, 50% will come from coal and 50% will come from non-fossil fuel-based sources.
Right.
And so the maths absolutely stacks up, because the 100 is actually becoming 200, and of the incremental 200, it'll be flipped around. 70 will come from non-coal and 30 will come from coal, perhaps.
Okay. Because while the government is talking about increasing or ramping up clean energy sources as well, this is the contradiction that some people are pointing out, that it's also talking about ramping up coal production dramatically. So just yesterday, the coal ministry, the government said that we want to make sure that Coal India is producing 100 billion tons, I correct myself, 1 billion tons of coal annually, which is double almost the current production of coal. So you're going from about 500, 600 million tons to 1 billion tons. How does that square off with trying to meet these clean energy goals? Because we understand the full consequences of coal, right? The health and the economic consequences.
Yeah.
So if you're planning
So,
to double
I
coal
think,
capacity,
yeah.
how does that
So
square
I
off?
think, yeah. So the point is, India does import a lot of coal right now as well. Now I'm presuming that with the enhanced production domestically, some of those imports will no longer need to happen.
Right.
We import about 200 million tons of coal every year, or something in that, something fairly large. So that will come down because now it will all be produced in India. But look, what we are trying to do is we're trying to meet multiple different competing objectives. What are those? The fact that we have to green our energy systems.
Sure.
Two, that we have to continue to make sure that we have room for economic growth and that power supply is there, because obviously we can't have a situation where you have load shedding and so on happening in the country, right?
Right.
And so therefore you do need to you do need to have more coal-based power coming in as well, and therefore you will have coal also increasing. In my earlier example, if you recall, I said coal goes from 70 units to 100 units, so there is an increase of 30 units as well. But in the absolute basket of the 200 units, coal will now become only 50% instead of being 70% out of the 100 units.
So this is a dichotomy which I wasn't able to understand, and maybe you can shed some light. That already capacity-wise, coal is already at roughly 50% and everyone else is roughly at 50%. But when it comes to generation, it's 70-30. Why is that?
That is because, see, solar operates only when the sun is shining and wind operates only when the wind is blowing. And that typically happens for only 25 to 30% of the time.
Right.
Whereas coal plants can operate at 55 to 60% or even more depending on the requirement. And so therefore 1 megawatt of solar or 1 megawatt of wind gives you power equal to half a megawatt of coal. So therefore you need double the capacity to generate the same kind of power. And so therefore you need more capacity of renewables to generate an equal amount of power.
Okay, interesting. But then isn't that a problem that's not going to change, Sumant? Because even if you increase your renewable capacity even further, as I said, it's already about 50-50 anyway, even if you continue to ramp up, you will still face this problem of the seasonality of non-coal-based power. So then you're still generating huge amounts of coal-based power.
That's true. And so therefore, you need to have very advanced systems to manage the grid so that they can absorb up to 50% of renewable energy capacities. And that requires investments in transmission. It requires investments in the digital side of managing this load on the generation side and the consumer load.
Right.
And it does require investment on the distribution side.
Right.
And that is really where we have a problem, because state governments in India, which control the utility sector, have not invested and are not investing on the distribution utilities. And as you know, they're all in very poor financial health. And that, to me, is the one big problem in the Indian power sector that has to be resolved. Now, the government is proposing amendments in the Electricity Act that help address this problem, but it is something that has to be passed, and states have to fundamentally come on board with this whole program.
That's interesting. You're absolutely right. I think when you point out the state of, literally the state of the state electricity boards, as you said, heavily in debt, very bad finances, and are simply not upgrading or investing enough in upgradation to these cleaner alternatives. And that could be a big hurdle in these goals that we try to set out. But you yourself, with Renew Power, now help me out here. From what I understood, you are producing, of the total about 100 gigawatts of renewable, you're doing about 6 to 7 gigawatts?
That's right. Yes.
Is that right? And
that's right.
Okay. But in terms of scalability, you think, Sumant, that given, as you said, the economic climate where you have to sell often, or you're dealing with these somewhat cash-strapped or financially fragile, state power boards, is it realistic? Can you actually scale up in a financially viable way? Is it more expensive to sell?
So the central government has done an interesting innovation here. They've created an entity called the Solar Energy Corporation of India, which carries out auctions and with whom we now sign our power purchase agreements. So we are no longer taking exposure to the DISCOMs directly.
Okay.
We are taking exposure to SECI, which is a central government undertaking. Okay. And SECI in turn takes the risk of the distribution utilities. So we are actually insulated now from the utilities. And that's actually a very significant measure that the government has taken.
Right.
And of course, as you know, the government is also working on a number of other different programs to try to improve the health of the DISCOMs. But I think ultimately states have to play ball as well. And that's really where the rubber meets the road.
Right. Last point to you about, again, the realistic nature of these goals, that we just had Jairam Ramesh on, former environment minister. He was saying, look, these big announcements aside, there's a hypocrisy or a double standards here, that at the global stage you make these big pledges to clean up, but in India you're systematically dismantling environmental protections and safeguards and laws and allowing deforestation, all of that. And so how do you balance those things out? You're putting the climate at risk in some ways while you're making these big promises outside.
Well, Srinivasan, I don't really know what's happening on the deforestation side. I do know that on the area of renewable energy and climate change in general, the government has taken a number of very, very credible steps and set very ambitious targets, which, at least as far as I can make out, all arms of the central government are working hard to make those happen.
Right.
And now, whether on deforestation specifically there is something happening or not happening, I cannot comment because, as I said, I'm not in that area. But certainly in renewable energy, in decarbonizing electricity, in deepening electrification, there is a tremendous amount of work that the government is doing. And I must say it's actually work that is far ahead of a number of other countries, in the world,
right,
including advanced countries or developed countries like the US and some countries in Europe as well. So
Okay.
I think in that sense, India is actually taking a very proactive step in advancing the cause of climate change globally. And as you know, India is one of the most vulnerable countries. So we have
Indeed.
to actually take leadership in this area.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear. But thank you so much indeed, Sumant, for joining us. I believe you have to go off and be part of panels, including, I believe, a round table with the Prime Minister later this evening on all of this?
There is a panel with various world leaders that I'll be part of. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think it'll be a good opportunity to exchange views and give them our sense of what needs to be done.
Okay, sounds good. Well, all the best and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Srinivasan.